Alright folks, how's it going? Welcome to the first episode of the Doctor Zhivago Slow Read, which I publish over on my Substack at camscampbellreads.substack.com, but I'm also putting it out as a video, obviously, and as an audio podcast, so you've got a choice of ways of getting this into you. So it began on the 1st of April, and this is going to be looking at chapter 1, which, today's the 9th of April, so that was the deadline for finishing chapter 1. And this is what we're going to discuss here. So basically what I've done is the same as what I did with The Master and Margarita, where I wrote an essay and then discussed it, basically read it out for YouTube, because that's the easiest way for me to get this out there and keep the editing to a minimum and allow me to produce every single week, which I'm going to be doing for the next 16 weeks. In fact, the other thing is that I'll be putting them out on Substack 1 week, possibly 2 weeks ahead of the public video, which is to say that this video will be embedded into a Substack post for Substack subscribers. Given that this is the first one, I think I'll put this one out public from the get-go, so that those who are not on Substack will be able to see this and catch up in time. But going forward, I'm going to be putting the videos out on Substack 2 weeks ahead of making them public on YouTube. Does that make sense? So basically it's a perk of being on my Substack. Although it's not paid, it's free, so you're perfectly welcome to come and watch on Substack and read along. But, I'd like you to sign up and participate, because that's what this is all about. And to those that have done that, I thank you. Right, so in the post, there is a list that's going to be at the top of every post where I've got links to the reading schedule, to the character list, to titles of the poems at the back of the novel. There are 25 poems. And I've got the translations from 2 different translations, as well as the Russian originals. And then a link to resources, so the different books and essays that I'm reading as supplementary material to inform me, so that I can then discuss what I'm learning with you, and then hopefully you'll discuss it back with me. That'd be great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this out, and probably as it's a video, I'll be showing you the books and stuff that I've got. So, if it's an audio thing, you won't see that, but I'll read out blurbs and stuff. Right, okay. Doctor Zhivago, Chapter 1, with the subtitle, I think one should be loyal to immortality, which is another word for life, a stronger word for it. 1901, quote, on they went, singing eternal memory. End quote. We begin in 1901. Immediately the words eternal memory are laid before us. This is not accidental. Memory and time are 2 of the novel's main themes. In this case, the translation is literal. The Russian Вечная память is the idiom used, where the English would be rest in peace. I think eternal memory is a bit nicer. If you have the Hayward Harari translation, you'll see may she rest in peace later in the paragraph. Pavir and Volokonsky have it as God rest her soul. These are translated from Царствие Небесное, a little literal translation of which would be the kingdom of heaven. Who has died? Zhivago's wife. That's all we're told. Is it the surviving husband of the titular Doctor Zhivago? We don't know yet. Names. Russian names can be challenging for non-Russian readers. The format goes first name, patronymic, surname. The patronymic is derived from the father's first name and will end in an A for women. So the deceased in this case is Maria Nikolaevna, daughter of Nikolai Zhivago. Typically, a woman's surname will also end in A, but not always, and in the case of Zhivago, it doesn't. Further down, we meet Nikolai Nikolaevich Vedenyapin, Maria's brother. They have the same father, but Nikolai's patronymic is in the masculine form. Maria's maiden name would have been Vedenyapina. In English, we might address someone we don't know as Mr. or Mrs. In Russian, one would use first name patronymic. That's what the narrator does here with Maria Nikolaevna. On nicknames and diminutives, I could write a whole thesis. I'll just try to keep you caught up as we encounter them. Uncle Kolya is Nikolai. Right, back to the story. A 10-year-old boy climbs onto his mother's grave. We get his name a few paragraphs later, Yura. He didn't know that his father had abandoned him and had spent the family's money. It seems they had rather a lot of it, as half the businesses in town are Zhivago businesses. There's even a cake named after them. Quote, "Suddenly it all vanished. They became poor." End quote. Was that as a result of Mr. Zhivago's womanizing and carousing? We don't know. 1903. Yura is 12. He's going with his uncle Kolya to see Ivan Ivanovich Voskoboynikov, a teacher and writer at the Kologrivov estate in Duplyanka, or as Pavirin Volokhonsky would have him, quote, "a pedagogue and popularizer of knowledge," end quote. Quote, "The half-reaped fields scorched in the sun like the half-shorn heads of convicts," end quote. This simile refers to convicts having half their heads shaved to mark them as convicts and dissuade them from escape. And I've got an image here of some convicts with half their heads shaved. We learn that Uncle Kolya later becomes a celebrated writer and that he does not share the views of the revolutionary writers and philosophers to come. Bear in mind that the first revolution would take place in Russia only 2 years later, in 1905. The country was ripe for change. We are told that Uncle Nikolai, a defrocked priest, had been, quote, both a Tolstoyan and a revolutionary idealist, end quote. Where my P&V edition becomes useful is in its footnotes. Quote, "Tolstoyism, an anti-state, anti-church, egalitarian social doctrine of the kingdom of God on earth, to be achieved by means of civil disobedience and non-violent resistance, was developed in the polemical writings of Leo Tolstoy and his disciples in the last decades of the 19th century. A number of revolutionary movements appeared during the same period in Russia, some more or less Marxist, others populist." End quote. We're then given a lovely description of Yura's character, that he's like his mother in his, quote, aristocratic sense of equality with all living things and the same gift of taking in everything at a glance and of expressing his thoughts as they first came to him and before they had lost their meaning and vitality, end quote. It sounds like he has the makings of a writer or a poet to me. Yura is excited to play with his friend Nicky Dudarov, a schoolboy who is 2 years Yura's senior and lives at the Kologrivov estate. Uncle Nikolai engages in a discussion with Ivan. Quote, Nikolai, "I think one should be loyal to immortality, which is another word for life, a stronger word for it. One must be true to immortality, true to Christ." End quote. Immortality. Eternal memory, time. Nikolai gets into an explanation of history, which he claims began with Christ in the Gospels. One can be an atheist and yet believe that man lives in a state of history. This is touched upon by Boris Kasparov in his essay on temporal counterpoint, and I found it utterly fascinating. Think of a symphony with melodic lines that enter and exit, merge and diverge. Now expand that metaphor to include all of humanity, a universal symphony that never ends, immortality. We'll discuss this idea more as we read further. There's a notion about history that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Edith W. Close posits that Pasternak adheres to a 3-part neo-Christian view of history, and this is what Uncle Kolya is talking about. 1. Pre-Christian Old Testament law. God is vengeful and man is subjugated. 2. Christian period of redemption, living by the premise of love thy neighbour. 3. Free selfhood or leechness. It's a progressive journey and one which Boris Zhivago takes through the novel. We'll touch upon this idea more as we read the novel. Quote, there was no history in this sense in the classical world. It was not until the coming of Christ that time and man could breathe freely. End quote. Trains. On the theme of temporal counterpoint, keep a note of how often trains feature in the novel. In this chapter, Nikolai and Ivan's conversation ends as the express from Syzran stops out of schedule. Think of the movement of a train as a melodic line in a symphony. Yura, also known by his nickname Yuri, which is what I'll be calling him henceforth, looks for Niki Dudorov, but he's nowhere to be found. It's an idyllic summer scene and Yuri is reminded of his mother as he hears her voice in the ether and of their trips to France and Italy, Antibes and Bordighera. He climbs down into a gully where he prays for his mother. He forgets to pray for his father, whom he doesn't remember anyway. Enter Misha Gordon, a boy of 11. He's on a train with his father. They've been travelling for 3 days. Quote, all the movements in the world, taken separately, were sober and deliberate, but, taken together, they were all happily drunk with the general flow of life which united and carried them. End quote. You see, a symphony. It's all happening, quote, not only on the earth which buried the dead, but also on some other level known to some as the kingdom of God, to others as history, and yet to others by some other name. Misha Gordon is an anxious boy. He feels unloved, different, other. Misha Gordon is a Jew. He feels contempt for the grown-ups for making such a world and is quite convinced that when he's a grown-up, he'll fix it. Remember that the express from Syzran had stopped out of schedule? Well, it was Misha Gordon's father who had pulled the emergency stop cord. He pulled it because a man had leapt out of the moving train while being chased by another man. The jumper was a suicide and none other than Zhivago, Yuri's father. His companion was his lawyer, Komarovsky. Here we have an example of coincidence. Yuri's father jumps from a train a mere stone's throw from where Yuri was. Coincidences crop up a lot in the novel, and for some it's taken as evidence that the novel fails as an epic and instead is lyric. Pasternak was a poet of some long standing when he wrote Doctor Zhivago, although he saw it as his opus. He said in a letter in July 1952, quote, I need to build a house for which all this poorly written verse can be the window frames. End quote. It's interesting that the protagonist of Doctor Zhivago is himself a writer of verse and not a novelist. Epic or lyric. Did Pasternak intend to write an epic? The author of the screenplay for the film of Doctor Zhivago, Robert Bolt, thought Pasternak's work, quote, less an ordinary novel than a disguised poem, end quote. Earlier in her essay, Close writes, quote, in the early 1920s, Pasternak formulated the goal of writing a long narrative in prose. In a poem written shortly after My Sister Life, he bids farewell to poetry, quote, I will say so long to verse, my mania, I have an appointment with you in a novel. And here Pasternak once again makes clear that for him, prose and poetry do not occupy opposite spheres. Abandoning the verse form, Pasternak kept his appointment with lyric discourse by experimenting in the new and, for him, difficult form of the novel. End quote. An epic novel would have the characters' lives shaped by the grand, sweeping historical events surrounding them. But, in Doctor Zhivago, these events serve simply as a framework. The characters develop almost despite the events, rather than because of them. We get feelings rather than actions. For me, that's the strength of the novel. Is Close saying that the novel fails because it's lyric and not epic? You can watch me as I parse this in real time. Only a week ago I discussed in a video how I'm not an expert and didn't know what these terms meant. It was this quotation here that got me all in a quandary. Quote, in terms of its discursive and genre structure, Doctor Zhivago is about the tension between the lyric and the epic, in which the lyric impulse reasserts itself with a vengeance. Perhaps it is this tension between discourses and their strongly differing assumptions about human nature, society, time and fate that really makes Doctor Zhivago a novel. End quote. I'm beginning to get it now though, and as I'm rereading War and Peace right now, it's got me thinking that it too qualifies as a novel with tension between the lyric and the epic. It's regarded as the quintessential epic, so maybe it's a question of the ratio. Or are these terms in fact not all that useful? Yeah, probably that. Read it and enjoy it without worrying about what academic terms apply. Nicky Dudorov hides under the bed and hears Yuri's looking for him. He waits until it's safe to come out and then jumps out of the window and heads to the park. We learn of his background. His father is a terrorist serving hard labour in a penal colony, and his mother is a Georgian princess. She abandoned him, lying that she was going to Georgia, and instead went to St. Petersburg to take part in the uprisings. Nicky's at a pond in the park with a 15-year-old girl, Nadia. Quote, the pond had water lilies growing all round the edge. The boat cut into them with a dry rustle, making a triangular rift. The dark water showed in it like the juice in a watermelon where a segment has been cut out. End quote. Lyric or epic? Or just lovely language that stood out to me and inspired me to include it in this essay? Yeah, I'll go with that. Characters from Chapter 1 to look out for through the novel are Yuri, obviously, Nicky Dudorov and Misha Gordon. And that's a wrap. I'm trying to be looser in my writing to make it feel less like I'm submitting something to the great canon of academic thought, and more like I'm just thinking out loud about a novel that I love. That's why you're here, right? And I urge you to join in the conversation. I'll be reading more essays as well as 2 more books about Doctor Zhivago because I find it fascinating. I look forward to sharing more thoughts with you as we read the novel. Right, that's the essay. Let me show you the books. This one I've literally just taken out the envelope. Lara, The Untold Love Story That Inspired Doctor Zhivago by Anna Pasternak. Let me read the blurb for you. Millions have fallen in love with Doctor Zhivago, but the heartbreaking true story that inspired it has never been fully explored. Boris Pasternak would often say, Lara exists, go and meet her, describing the love of his life and literary muse Olga Ivinskaya. Olga paid an enormous price for loving her Boria. A pawn in a highly political game, she was imprisoned twice in Siberian labour camps due to her association with him and his controversial work. But as Anna Pasternak reveals for the first time, without this passionate love affair and the critical role played by Olga in Boris's life, Doctor Zhivago may never have been completed or published. So I'm looking forward to this. This was recommended to me by a reader, Steve Ramsey, and I thank you, Steve, for the recommendation. It's got photos in it as well, so I love it when a book has photos. This is the book of essays, which I've already quoted to you from a couple of times. I'm not finished it yet. I've still got 2 more to read. I'm finding it academic, quite dense, but if I take my time with it and read it when my energy level's quite high, it's rewarding. So I'm looking forward to sharing more about the book as I go. And this was recommended also by a reader, but I first saw it in a Goodreads review. The Zhivago Affair, The Kremlin, the CIA and the Battle Over a Forbidden Book by Peter Finn and Petra Couvet. So does it have a blurb? Let me read it for you. 1956, Boris Pasternak presses a manuscript into the hands of an Italian publishing scout with these words. This is Dr. Zhivago. may it make its way around the world. Pasternak knew his novel would never be published in the Soviet Union as the authorities regarded it as seditious. So, instead, he allowed it to be published in translation all over the world. A highly dangerous act. 1958. The life of this extraordinary book enters the realms of the spy novel. The CIA, recognising that the Cold War was primarily an ideological battle, published Doctor Zhivago in Russian and smuggled it into the Soviet Union. It was immediately snapped up on the black market. Pasternak was later forced to renounce the Nobel Prize in Literature, igniting worldwide political scandal. With first access to previously classified CIA files, the Zhivago affair gives an irresistible portrait of Pasternak and takes us deep into the Cold War, back to a time when literature had the power to shake the world. I mean, how fascinating does that sound? The CIA, an American spy organisation, smuggling seditious Russian literature into the Soviet Union for purposes of what? Destabilising the regime? I mean, what else could it be? So I'm super excited to read that. And I think with these 3 books and what else I can find online, I mean, we're reading this over 4 months, so that's quite a long time. With reading only 1 chapter a week, so that's going to leave me time for all this extra reading and will bring me knowledge to share with you as we go. So that's where we are. Thank you very much for joining me on this first episode, and I look forward to sharing more with you as we go. As I've said, hit me up on camscampbellreads.substack.com if you want to follow along with the weekly essays. You'll need to change your settings on Substack if you're already a member to make sure that you're signed up to the Doctor Zhivago section. And then you'll get my weekly essays into your inbox every week. So there we go. I've been Cams Campbell, your host, and I will speak to you all again very soon. Next week, in fact. See you then.